still have the photos on a hard drive somewhere. I don't look at them. I don't think I ever will again. But they're there. And knowing that is enough to keep me from ever going back to that part of the Washita National Forest. Before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like the video and share it with your close friends and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from. Thank you all for the support. It truly means a lot to me. Now, let's start. This happened in the fall of 2019. I was 26, working as a land surveyor for a small firm based out of Hot Springs, Arkansas. We did a lot of contract work for the Forest Service, boundary marking, terrain mapping, that kind of thing. Most of it was routine. You walk a section of forest, take your measurements, plant your flags, and leave. I'd been doing it for 3 years and never once felt unsafe out there. Bored sometimes, sure. Sore a lot, but not scared. That October, I was assigned a solo job along a stretch of forest near the Washita Trail, somewhere between the Flatside, Wilderness Boundary, and Crystal Prong Creek. Remote area? Not a popular section for hikers. The closest road was about 4 miles south, and even that was a gravel logging road that saw maybe 1 truck a week. My job was to mark out a 2-mile survey line that would take about 3 days. I drove out. On a Monday, parked my truck at the end of a Forest Service road off Highway 9, loaded up my pack, and started walking. The weather was perfect, cool, dry, leaves turning. I set up a base camp near a small clearing about a mile in. Nothing fancy. Tent, tarp, camp stove. I'd done it dozens of times. The first 2 days went fine. I worked the line, took my measurements, ate my freeze-dried dinners, and listened to podcasts in my tent at night. The only unusual thing, and I barely registered it at the time, was that on Tuesday morning, I found a boot print about 30 yards from my tent. Just one. Clear tread pattern in a patch of bare dirt near the creek. I figured it was an old print from a hunter or a hiker. The soil was soft there. Could have held a print for weeks. I didn't think about it again. On Tuesday afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I found the trail camera. It was strapped to an oak tree about 5 feet off the ground, pointed at a deer path that crossed the survey line. Trail cameras aren't unusual in hunting areas. People set them up in September and October to scout deer movement before rifle season. I wouldn't have looked twice at it except for one thing. It was pointed at my campsite. I walked back to the clearing where my tent was and turned around. From my tent, the camera was invisible. Too far, too much brush. But when I stood at the camera and looked at the LCD display, I could see my tent clearly in the frame. The camera was a stealth cam, one of the older models. It had a padlock on the case, but it was the cheap kind, and the latch was loose. I popped it open. There were 312 images on the card. The first 50 or so were deer, normal trail cam stuff. Does at dawn, a couple of young bucks at dusk. Then the photos changed. They were all of me arriving on Monday, me setting up my tent, me eating dinner, me walking to the creek with my water filter, me standing in the clearing looking at my phone, me zipping up my tent at night. There were photos from Monday night to infrared shots, the kind trail. Cameras take in the dark, shots of my tent glowing from my headlamp inside, and then a shot from about 2 in the morning of something I hadn't heard and hadn't noticed. A person standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 feet from my tent, facing it. The figure was a man. The infrared made his eyes glow white. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He was just standing there with his arms at his sides. The timestamp said 2:14 a.m. I scrolled further. There were 6 more infrared photos over the next hour. In each one, he was a little closer. The last photo before dawn showed him standing directly next to my tent. I could see his hand resting on the rain fly. My legs went weak. I actually sat down on the ground. I pulled the SD card out of the camera and put it in my pocket, then stood there trying to decide what to do. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. I had maybe 2.5 hours of daylight. My truck was 4 miles away. Packed my camp in about 10 minutes. Just shoved everything into my pack without folding or rolling anything. I left the survey flags, left my measurement stakes, left a whole roll of flagging tape hanging from a branch. I didn't care. I walked fast, almost jogging on the flat sections, checking behind me every 30 seconds. I made it to my truck at just past 5:30. The sun was going down behind the ridge. As I threw my pack in the bed and fumbled with my keys, I looked back at the tree line. The logging road I was parked on dead-ended at a gate about 50 yards behind me. There was another vehicle parked at the gate. A white pickup truck. It hadn't been there when I'd arrived on Monday. I got in my truck and drove. I called the Garland County Sheriff from the highway. They sent a deputy out the next day who said the white truck was gone and the trail camera had been removed from the tree. There were no prints, no evidence, nothing to follow up on. The deputy said it was probably just a hunter keeping tabs on his spot and that the guy near my tent might have been checking to see if I was poaching. At 2 in the morning, standing next to my tent, touching it, I showed the photos to my boss. He pulled me off solo assignments for 3 months. I eventually went back to field work, but never to that area. A few months later, I was talking to a ranger at the Jesseville station and mentioned what happened. He got quiet for a second and said there had been 2 other reports that fall of people finding cameras in unusual spots along that section of trail. He didn't say anything else about it, and I didn't ask. My wife and I almost didn't go that weekend. We'd been arguing about money, about the usual stuff, and a trip felt like the last thing either of us needed. But we'd already booked the cabin and the deposit was non-refundable, so on a Friday afternoon, in late March, we packed the car and drove 3 hours north to Sumner Lake in northeastern New Mexico. The cabin was one of about 8 on a dirt loop road managed by a private outfitter called High Plains Retreats. I'd found it on one of those off-grid rental sites, not Airbnb, one of the smaller ones. The listing looked fine. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a covered porch overlooking the lake. It said secluded about 4 times in the description, which should have been a warning, but at the time that's exactly what we wanted. We got there around 7. It was already dark. The road to the cabins wasn't marked from the highway. We missed the turn twice and ended up using the coordinates from the confirmation email to find it. The loop road was rough, barely maintained. We passed 3 cabins that were clearly unoccupied. No lights, no cars, shutters closed. Ours was the 4th one on the left, and when we pulled up, the porch light was on and the door was unlocked. Just like the email said it would be, inside was fine. A little dusty, a little cold, but fine. Basic furniture, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower that took 10 minutes to get warm. We lit the wood stove, made pasta on the propane range, and sat on the couch reading. Around 10 o'clock, Sarah went spade. I stayed up for another hour listening to the fire pop before I turned in. I stepped out onto the porch to bring in the cooler. It was dead quiet. No wind, no insects too early in the year for that. The lake was about 100 yards downhill through the trees. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the openness of it in the dark. The kind of still that only exists in places far from roads. There was a light on the other side of the lake. Yeah, Single light, yellowish, like a lantern or a bare bulb. I watched it for about a minute. It didn't move. Probably another cabin. I went inside and locked the door. Saturday was nice. We hiked a loop trail that went along the east bank of the lake, ate sandwiches on a rock, and came back to the cabin in the afternoon. We didn't see a single other person all day. The other cabins on the loop were still empty. I thought about the light across the lake, but didn't see anything from the daytime side, just trees and brush. No structures visible. Saturday night is when it started. We were sitting on the porch around 8:30, drinking wine, when Sarah said, "Do you hear that?" I didn't, at first. Then I did. It was a tapping sound, rhythmic, steady, like someone knocking on wood. It was coming from the direction of the lake. Tap, 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 every 2 or 3 seconds. It went on for about 5 minutes, then stopped. Told Sarah it was probably a woodpecker or a branch hitting something. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. We went inside. Around midnight, I woke up. I don't know what woke me, not a sound, exactly, more like a feeling. That thing your body does when something's wrong before your brain catches up. I lay there for a minute, listening. Sarah was breathing steadily next to me. The wood stove was still crackling softly in the other room. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate. The boards out there were old, and they creaked in a specific sequence, depending on which direction you walked. Someone was walking from the far end of the porch toward the front door. I counted 6 creaks, then silence. I sat up in bed. I didn't wake Sarah. I don't know why. Maybe I was still telling myself it was an animal. A raccoon? A deer? I got up and walked to the front room in my boxers and bare feet. The fire had died down to embers. The porch light was off. I'd left it on. I stood at the front window and looked out through the gap in the curtains. The porch was empty. But the rocking chair, the wooden one that had been pushed against the wall when we arrived, was now in the middle of the porch, facing the front door. I checked the deadbolt, still locked. I turned the porch light back on from the switch. By the door. I looked out the kitchen window, the bathroom window, the bedroom window. Nothing. I stood in the dark kitchen for 10 minutes, waiting. The tapping started again. From the lake. Same rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Dot. I went back to bed and lay there with my eyes open until dawn. Sunday morning, I told Sarah we should leave early. I didn't tell her about the footsteps or the chair. I said I wasn't feeling well. She was fine with it. She'd said the place felt off since we'd arrived and I hadn't listened. While she packed, I walked down to the lake. I wanted to see the other side in daylight. The shore was muddy and there was a narrow gravel beach. I walked along it for about 50 yards until I had a clear sight line across the water. On the far bank, maybe a quarter mile away, there was a structure. Not a cabin, more like a lean-to, or maybe an old equipment shed. And in front of it, at the water line, there was a dock. And on the dock, there was a chair. A rocking chair. Same style as the one on our porch. Same dark wood. I could see it clearly even from that distance. And next to the chair, standing on the dock facing directly across the lake, directly at me, was a person. I couldn't make out details, too far, but they were standing completely still, and they were looking my way. I walked back to the cabin, loaded the car, and we left. I drove the whole 3 hours home without stopping. I emailed the rental company that afternoon to ask about the property across the lake. They never responded. I emailed again a week later. Nothing. The listing for our cabin was taken down. About a month after that, I checked once or twice. It never came back. Sarah still doesn't know about any of it. I don't know what I'd even tell her. I want to be clear about something before I tell this story. I don't believe in ghosts. I didn't before this happened, and I still don't. But I also can't explain what I heard on that mountain, and I've stopped trying to. In the summer of 2021, I worked as a fire lookout for the Bitterroot National Forest in western Montana. The station was called Bear Peak, about 7,000 feet up, accessible only by a 4-mile trail from a Forest Service road near Darby. It was a 14 by 14 foot cab on a 20-foot steel tower, classic Elfer design if you know. The stout one room, a cot, a desk, a propane stove, an Osborne fire finder in the center, and windows on all 4 sides. My job was to sit up there from June through September, watch for smoke, and radio it in. I loved it. I know that sounds strange for a job that's basically staring at trees for 4 months, but I did. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree I wasn't using, and the solitude felt like medicine. I'd hike in on Monday mornings with a week's worth of food and hike out on Friday afternoons. The nearest person was a rancher about 6 miles east whose lights I could sometimes see at night. Other than that, it was just me, the Osborne, and about 200 square miles of unbroken wilderness. The thing about being that isolated is that you learn the sounds. After a few weeks, I could tell the difference between a pine squirrel and a chipmunk by the way they moved on the catwalk outside. I knew which direction the wind was coming from by which window whistled. I could identify individual trees creaking in a storm. Your ears become incredibly tuned when there's nothing else competing for attention. Which is why what happened the night of July 14th doesn't make sense to me. It was a Thursday. I remember because I'd been listening to a Mariners game on the AM radio and they'd lost again, and I'd turned it off in disgust. It was about 11 at night. Clear sky, no moon, more stars than you've ever seen in your life. I was lying on the cot reading a paperback, I think. It was a John le Carre. One of the smiley ones when I heard a voice. Not a sound that could be mistaken for a voice. An actual human voice. Speaking clearly. Coming from outside the cab, on the catwalk. It said my name, my full name, first and last, in a tone that was conversational, almost casual, like someone greeting me at the start of a shift. "Hey, Nathan Erickson." I sat up. My heart rate went from resting to about 140 in maybe 2 seconds. I wasn't wearing shoes. My headlamp was on the desk. The radio was on the desk. I was lying in the dark in my sleeping bag staring at the door. I didn't move for probably 5 minutes. The voice didn't come again. Eventually, I reached for the headlamp, clicked it on, and pointed it at the windows. The beam hit the glass and reflected back. I couldn't see anything outside. I got up, put on my boots, grabbed the radio and the can of bear spray I kept by the door, and opened it. The catwalk was empty. I walked the full perimeter of the tower, shining the headlamp down into the trees below. Nothing moved. Sounds. No footprints in the dust on the catwalk except mine. I went back inside and sat at the desk with the bear spray in my hand until the sun came up the next morning. I radioed the district office and reported what I'd heard. The dispatcher, a woman named Gail who'd worked the Bitterroot district for 20 years, went quiet for a few seconds and then asked me to describe the voice. I told her mail.com. Claire knew my name. She asked if it had said anything else. I said no. She told me to come down on Friday as planned and to make sure I locked the cab hatch before I left. When I got to the district office, Gail was there. She took me aside in the parking lot and told me something that I think about probably once a week, even now. She said the lookout before me, a guy named James who'd worked Bear Peak for 2 summers, had reported the exact same thing. A voice on the catwalk. His name? Once at night. He'd quit the next morning and never came back to the forest service. She said the lookout before James had reported it too. She didn't tell me what to do. She just said, some people hear it and stay. Some hear it and go. Neither one is wrong. I finished the season. I heard it one more time, in late August, around 3 in the morning during a thunderstorm. Same voice, same tone, my name. I didn't get up that time. I just lay there and said, out loud, I hear you. And after a minute, the storm filled the silence back in. I didn't go back for a second season. Not because I was scared, I was a little, but because I'd gotten a job offer in Bozeman and it paid real money. But sometimes at night, when I'm in a quiet room and the house settles, I think about that tower. And I think about whatever was on that catwalk. And I wonder what it wanted. I looked James up once, found him on LinkedIn. He works for a lumber company in Eugene now. I thought about sending him a message, but I didn't know what I'd say. Hey, did the mountain say your name too? Yeah, I didn't send it. My buddy Derek and I have been fishing the Chattooga River in North Georgia since we were kids. Our dads took us when we were 10, and after they both got too old for the hike in, Derek and I kept going. Every October, like clockwork, we'd camp. 2 nights on a sandbar about 3 miles upstream from the Earl's Ford access point. Catch brown trout, drink cheap beer, and not talk about work. It was our thing. We'd been doing it for 15 years without a problem. Last October was different. We hiked in on a Friday afternoon. Same trail, same route, same sandbar. The campsite was exactly how we'd left it the year before. Flat spot for the tent, fire ring made of river stones, a downed hemlock we used as a bench. Derek said something like, still standing, and we set up camp. By 6 o'clock we had a fire going and lines in the water. The first sign was the smell. Around 8, Derek wrinkled his nose and said, "You smelled that?" I did. It was a sour, chemical smell, like burnt plastic mixed with something organic. It wasn't a campfire smell. It wasn't a dead animal smell. It was something I couldn't categorize. And it came in waves, strong for 30 seconds, then gone, then back again. We figured it was something upstream, maybe a spill, maybe someone dumped something. The Chattooga runs through some unincorporated areas, where people aren't always careful about what goes in the water. It faded after about an hour, and we stopped thinking about it. We turned in around 10. The tent was about 20 feet from the river, and the sound of the water was loud enough to mask most things. I fell asleep fast. I woke up at some point later. I didn't check the time because Derek was gripping my arm. Hard. He was on his side facing me. And even in the dark, I could tell his eyes were wide open. He whispered, "Listen." I listened. At first, I just heard the river. Then, underneath it, I heard something else. A scraping sound. Rhythmic, like something being dragged across gravel. It was coming from the riverbank, maybe 30 feet away. Scrape, pause. Scrape, pause. Like someone pulling a heavy object along the ground. Derek and I looked at each other. Neither of us moved. The scraping went on for what felt like 10 minutes. It was probably 3. Then it stopped. We heard what sounded like a splash. Not a big one, but deliberate. Like something being lowered into the water, not thrown. We didn't go out. We didn't even unzip the tent. We lay there until the river sounds filled the silence back up, and then we lay there some more. I think I slept again eventually, but I'm not sure. Saturday morning, the first thing I did was check outside the tent. Our gear was untouched. The fire ring was undisturbed. Our cooler was exactly where we'd left it. But when I walked down to the river to fill the coffee pot, I saw it. There was a drag mark in the gravel, a wide one, about 18 inches across, running from the tree line down to the water's edge. The gravel was displaced in a clear path, like something heavy had been pulled straight to the river. At the waterline, the gravel was pushed into a small mound where whatever it was had been slid in. Derek saw it too. He stood there with his hands on his hips and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Could be a log."